Well, with me tonight is our very own politically motivated panel. We've got Joe Tanner, the former Conservative advisor and the founder and director of In-House Communications, and the Guardian columnist, Owen Jones. Thanks very much for being with us today. Feels like we should kick off with the moment of the campaign today. Was there anything that really stood out for you on the campaign trail today, Owen?
I think it was Jeremy Corbyn holding up a speaker as Rachel Maskell, the Labour MP, spoke to this huge crowd at York. I mean, the one thing I'd say about whatever you think about Jeremy is he thrives on campaigning, he thrives in going all over the country, talking to people. There was thousands of people spontaneously out in York. And I suppose it does contrast quite sharply with Theresa May's tightly controlled events. Obviously, their whole view is treat this as this machine operation, make sure she keeps away from the public as much as possible in case there's any slip-up. And he was out there, I suppose,
and you think that's him in his element, really, out on the streets?
That's what he loves to do, isn't it? That's his big USP. He likes to be campaigning out on the streets. You know, of course, crowds aren't enough, as we know, when it comes to an election, but there's obviously huge enthusiasm out there, which he's trying to tap into out in York.
He nicked mine.
Is that your campaign moment as well?
That was mine. I mean, I'd say the only...
Did I nick yours?
You did, shocking.
I did not nick
yours. Harmony, I love
but
this.
actually, the only...
Sorry, Joe.
No, that's
Forgive
right.
me, come on.
I will. But the only thing I'd say is that the sad thing about that is that it doesn't look prime ministerial. So it was kind of fun, but actually doing that kind of movement didn't look...
Meeting people.
No, but the holding the speaker up, it's that kind of... It's the nice Jeremy, it's what he'd do, but is it really prime ministerial? So from my point of view, it's an interesting photo op. The actually interesting one I saw as well was Nicola Sturgeon making pies. Yesterday we had Ruth Davidson in Scotland making shortbread. So Nicola now came out... Is that
prime ministerial making shortbread?
Well, she's not going for prime ministerial.
Well, I mean, what about Nicola Sturgeon?
It's a typical food shot is the thing to do, but don't eat on camera. We all know what.
So we've got shortbread versus
you can make
pies.
the stuff, but don't eat it.
Theresa May ate on camera the other week, didn't she?
Yeah, that did her a lot of good, didn't it?
Well, we'll come back to you very shortly for more analysis throughout the programme. But talking... Well, Joe and Owen are here with us again, and they must be breathing a big sigh of relief then in the Conservative Party, Joe.
I think so. I mean, this was always looming, wasn't it? We knew it was going to come. We had the suspicion that actually calling the election was going to be helpful because all those candidates now, as were MPs under suspicion, were then going to be able to fight their seats again. But I think, yeah, definitely a huge sigh of relief. But the bigger issue is that election, quite frankly, was a shambles because everyone ended up with a fine afterwards, I think, in terms of the Tories, Labour and the Lib Dems. So nobody's really covered themselves in glory at all overspending in the 2015 election.
Do you think this will draw a line under it from the Conservative Party?
Well, I think just because something's legal doesn't mean it's just, right or fair. I mean, it's like, you know, the whole debate over tax avoidance and tax evasion. Tax evasion is illegal. It's when you're just going against what the letter of the law says. Tax avoidance is finding loopholes in the law so you can avoid paying taxes which others people are paying, but it's technically legal. You just kind of gone against what the law intended you to do. And I think that's what's happened here, because what they had to find was intention on the part of the local candidates.
Yeah.
But because HQ said, no, we take responsibility for this, because of the way the law is structured, that meant the MPs themselves couldn't be held to account according to what the law says. So yeah, the law, just because, as I say, just because something is the law doesn't mean it's right, fair or just as I don't think tax avoidance is, and they did exploit the spirit of the law here, even if that hasn't broken the letter.
Do you agree that they've exploited the spirit?
I mean, you know, the law is the law and we have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that someone is guilty, and I think the issue here is that there wasn't the evidence to prosecute anybody beyond reasonable doubt in terms of guilt. So you can talk about intent, but you can also talk about the evidence that was available. So the bottom line is, in a sense, the start of battle buses, there will be other technologies that will be brought into elections. As things evolve, what the central party does and what happens with local candidates, I'm sure will become more confusing, and these problems will emerge over time. And I think this issue about how the law is structured and how it's applied is potentially going to be a problem for years to come, because you will constantly have this strain between the central party and the individual candidates, and who's actually held to account under the law as it stands.
I mean, just quick, in a democracy like this, the fear is that those with the most money and most resources obviously get an advantage. In this election, the Tories are going to have about twice as much dosh as Labour. I'm not just saying, people are just bribed and, through advertising and all the rest, but you wouldn't spend all that money unless you didn't think it actually had some sort of impact. And if you end up with a party which obviously has very big business donors behind it and finding ways to use money technically slightly dubious morally, from a moral perspective ways, I think that is something which is highly questionable and worrying from a kind of democratic perspective.
But then it's also highly questionable for a Labour Party to pay for a giant piece of stone, which was the reason they were fined in the 2015 election.
You lot would have paid for that if you could,
but they didn't, quite frankly. They paid for a bus, which probably travelled a lot further and probably did a lot more good. So we could argue about whether the money was well spent. They should have been fined for just spending money really poorly, let alone the fact whether it was illegal or not.
Oh, the headstone.
God rest its soul.
Yeah, we think of it fondly. Let's move on to Labour now, shall we? We'll come back to you shortly. It can feel as though education hasn't really been a priority in previous elections, but do you think perhaps this time it could be at front and centre of the campaign, Jo?
It should be. I mean, I'm a governor of a primary school, and I think it's an area that often doesn't get discussed enough. And we can end up getting bogged down in the university tuition fee debate and not talk about what's happening right into early years where, you know, these are the foundations for the future of tomorrow. So it's kind of nice to hear it being talked about, but obviously until we get the full manifestos, it feels a bit pointless because you kind of need more detail. And obviously, unfortunately, today when Labour started to lay out its plans, Angela Rayner got in a bit of a pickle just as she started the morning. So it's rather unfortunate when that ends up dominating the discussion rather than the policy. It's actually the mix-up over what you're talking about. It seems a bit sad, really, that we're not talking about the issues themselves.
And there's been a lot of focus about how Labour's going to pay for this. I mean, do you think this is the kind of Achilles heel that, in a way, in order to get a hearing for your policies, you have to make people believe that you can pay for them first?
Of course, it's got to be costed, and I think that's what again, you're right, we haven't had the manifesto, but that's what it will seek to do. I mean, education was front and central of the 1997 campaign.
Yeah.
Education.
That was 20 years ago.
It was ago now, doesn't it?
Education. So maybe they're actually being a bit Blairite about it. No, I think I think this is critical because it's a cliche, isn't it? But education's about investing in the next generation. If you don't invest in the next generation, you're not investing in the future of your country. And I do think with tuition fees, the issue there is, one thing, is this system actually sustainable? Because lots of people get to the point where they don't pay back the loans. But the other point is, we've seen a collapse, for example, of part-time numbers under the tuition fees regime. That disproportionately affects particularly working class aspirational people over the age of 25. The other is young people have had a real kicking over the last few years. Everything from the educational maintenance allowance, which was scrapped, youth services cut, housing crisis disproportionately affects them, often a lack of secure skilled jobs for young people. And they often can't get on the housing ladder. Saddling them with debt doesn't help that either.
It would help if they voted, though, a bit more, wouldn't it? Then perhaps if politicians would focus a bit more on...
Well, hopefully that's what we're seeing from Labour, because I do think there's been, on the part of the Conservative Party, they think, we can do what we want to young people, they're never going to vote for us, we're not going to suffer the electoral consequences, so tough. And I think what Labour at least are trying to do here is redress that. They obviously, will it increase youth turnout? I hope it does, just from a democratic perspective. But at the end of the day, is it right in our democracy that young people are ignored because politicians don't think they're going to vote? I don't think that is right.
Let's come back to you to hear your thoughts on the big issues in the election campaign a little later on. Thank you both. We're joined again by our two expert guests. I mean, this is really extraordinary, isn't it? Like a full manifesto, it appears, or even if it's in draft form, being leaked to the newspapers. I mean, it must be very, very embarrassing, to say the least, annoying for the Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party.
Well, bang out of order he's ever done it. Whatever you think about Labour and so on, it's whoever's done it obviously has something of a vendetta. You wouldn't do it otherwise. It's obviously beyond unprofessional on that individual's part. But, you know, we haven't had time. Obviously, we've just been sitting in the room having a chat, so I haven't seen the details of it. But what is interesting, if we're going to talk about the manifesto now, such as we know the details, is dealing with obviously some of the big challenges facing the country, lowest level of house building in this country since the 1920s. If there's a Department of Housing to get that housing built, that's good for the economy, because it stimulates construction and other industries. It will get people into work. It will bring down the housing benefit bill because we spend £9 billion a year subsidising private landlords. So just one thing I've picked up, regardless of the rights or wrongs of it being leaked, which would be a good pledge.
I mean, this is every politician's nightmare, isn't it?
Well, this is sabotage on a major scale. I mean, not only... we were just discussing how could this have happened, because there's a point at which in manifesto development that you have a core team that are involved, and you'd probably have sections, policy experts who will be doing sections of the manifesto. So there must have been something going on. I don't know the rules and routes of the Labour Party, but I presume there was some sort of clearance process. This was going out to a wider audience. evidence. At that point, someone's had been brave enough to leak it. But even for the Mirror to be willing to run it at this stage when it hasn't gone through all of its final process is absolutely unprecedented. I mean, I'm really staggered that this has gone on.
Yeah, it's really staggering. Thank you both for reacting very quickly to a story that's moving quickly tonight. Now, before we go, let's take a look at the 3 images from the campaign today, which really defined the day of campaigning. And we've got our kind of 2 expert guests, of course, to kind of talk through them, what they all mean. Let's have a look at the first one, shall we? Here is Nicola Sturgeon with a haggis pie.
The aforementioned pie. Well, Ruth Davidson yesterday was making shortbread. So you've got to get a food picture in as soon as possible.
She looks very mischievous, but don't eat it on camera. Number 1 rule.
You can't eat a pie elegantly. There can't be a way you could do that elegantly, surely.
Introduced as some sort of electoral law that no politician should ever eat on camera.
But it would ruin all our fun.
I know. Where would our memes be on Twitter?
Have you ever had a haggis pie?
I've had a haggis, but I didn't know you could put them in pies.
No, and I don't think you should be. Oh, I've alienated the Scottish audience. I love a good haggis. Going to put that on record. Trying to bring them back.
You're in trouble. Minestrone pie, I hear, is big in Scotland, which sounds amazing to me.
Minestrone?
Oh, sorry, not macaroni pie.
Oh, macaroni. I was going to say.
I was going to say it might be a bit wet.
Soggy pie.
I'm desperate to go. I'm hoping to get one when I go to Glasgow next. It sounds amazing. Anyway, distracted by talk of pastry. Let's look at the next picture. Here is Theresa May's team with Nicky Morgan looking slightly forlorn.
Full of enthusiasm. Well, Nicky Morgan was obviously someone who has, I think, been a bit of a Tory rebel. She was someone who's very passionate about Remain. And obviously Theresa May was technically on the Remain side, though reinvented herself as a hardcore Brexiteer. But Nicky Morgan on things like grammar schools, the reintroduction of selection, secondary moderns, she's been a bit of a thorn in Theresa May's side and is no near the centre of power in the Tories anymore. She's been sidelined, hasn't she?
Do you think that some in the Conservative Party might be a bit wary about the thought that so many UKIP supporters are going over to their party?
Perhaps, but I think they're more interested in winning an election at the moment, I think, than who the supporters are. It's about making sure that they return a Conservative majority and a significant one. And that photo actually is just quite amusing. It's that awful thing of trying to get people to sit and listen to you. It's a bit like watching the House of Lords when you think everyone's asleep. It's that bit of how long can you listen to someone before you kind of blink at the wrong moment or start to drift off into your own world. I'm not sure.
Are you worried? I mean, this whole issue, because the Tories are becoming UKIPised. They've shifted. Nigel Farage says quite brazenly over and over again that Theresa May is now saying things he said for 20 years. I mean, for some traditional Tory voters, it must be a bit.
But I think the reality is that in order to deliver Brexit, you have to accept Brexit's going to happen, and therefore a lot of the narrative is going to sound more in terms of what UKIP were originally saying.
I don't even think there should be Brexit, don't they? But you can have a Brexit, which doesn't mean shifting onto a UKIP position of very kind of quite often quite embittered, strong rhetoric, quite intolerant about those who voted the other way.
Labour need to be doing more to woo UKIP voters if they want to win the election.
Well, Labour in a unique position, aren't they? Because, you've got some voters who voted Labour who really don't like Brexit. You've got others who think they've got the country back. And, some people have criticised Labour because they supported Article 50 going through Parliament, and then Theresa May said they tried to obstruct it, which they didn't do.
Let's have a look at our last and final picture, shall we? Here is Eddie Izzard, standing up for Wales. He's hitting the campaign trail for Labour. I have to say, he hasn't had great success in the campaigns that he's fought politically, has he?
No, I think he was better at running marathons, to be honest. When he didn't he do a marathon a day or something for a campaign? I think that was probably the most successful.
Bless him. He's a great comedian. What he is.
That's praise indeed.
He is first and foremost a comedian. He was growing up teenager, one of my favourite comedians.
But it's always dangerous.
Not so successful in his political interventions.
But it's always dangerous when people that are not naturally politicians venture into politics. For the parties, they're always desperate to get some stardust. And, that's always the problem, is how do you get the cool kids to kind of want to be with you?
I mean, that's the one when you get comedians entering politics, Eddie Izzard, Boris Johnson.
See what you did there.
He's Foreign Secretary.
I know.
Thank you very much for all your thoughts on a very lively day of campaigning as well. Thank you.